troublemaker, violent, difficult, dangerous, passionate, tortured, genius, theatrical, visionary, murderer. These are just some of the words that have been used to describe the artist Caravaggio. Welcome to Italy Beyond the Guidebook. I'm Deborah from Italy News Online, and I'm joined by my sister Sarah, also known as Flow Easy, a licensed tour guide based in Florence, Italy. In this podcast, we explore the art, monuments, characters, and moments that shaped Italy and what we see today. Caravaggio, one of the most brilliant and fascinating painters ever to have lived. Well, we definitely think so. So how did this conflicted man come to be, Sarah?
Well, on the 29th of September, 1571, Michelangelo Meresi is born in Lombardy, in the north of Italy, in a small town called Caravaggio, hence his name. His father, Fermo Meresi, a stonemason, his mother, Lucia Aratori. Now, it's interesting to note that it's actually through his mother's side that there is a family link to the noble family Colonna. Now, this is important for Caravaggio later in life because it's Costanza Colonna who supports the artist by giving him shelter when he's on the run and shielding him when he's under sentence of death. We return to his childhood, and in 1576, the plague in Milan takes the life of his father, grandfather, grandmother, and by the age of 13, he's an orphan. He will move from Caravaggio to Milan, and in 1584 he signs a contract of apprenticeship with an artist called Simone Pitizano in Milan. Now, as a student, he would have been taught the techniques of painting. So, for example, the grounding of pigments, the binding of colours, being taught how to paint on canvas or on fresco. Pitizano's work, the master, his name really has been eclipsed today by his student. But you only need to visit Milan to really understand that at the time he was viewed as a great painter. And this is judging by the number of works we see adorning churches, for example, the Santi Paolo and Barmi Church in Milan. By 1592, however, Caravaggio has left Milan and we find him in Rome. Now, the period in which he's travelling is quite interesting because there are a lot of thoughts that he may well have travelled via Venice. And in particular, having been inspired by the works of Tintoretto. Now, this is also interesting to note that Pitizano had promoted himself as a student to Titian, who was one of the great masters of the Venetian school. So it's interesting to look when we look at Caravaggio's style of painting, i.e. no drawing, and he paints straight onto the canvas, which is what the Venetians did.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't go into a church really in Venice without stumbling over a Tintoretto or a Titian. They are literally everywhere. But Tintoretto is believed only to have left Venice twice, once to go to Rome and once to Mantova, and they were before Caravaggio was born. So if he was influenced by them, he surely must have visited the lagoon city.
Yeah. And there are similarities you see with Tintoretto. There is this dark background and there is this burst of light that's centered on the main characters. So I personally think he did go there. Yeah. But anyway, maybe via Venice, he'll arrive in Rome, and we find Rome as a city of contrasts. There is extreme poverty, huge wealth. There are vagabonds, thieves, prostitutes, popes and cardinals, quite the combination.
Yeah, and the last two are hardly role models of virtuous living either at the time, are they?
No. But in Rome, Caravaggio will find a position within the studio of Giuseppe Cesare, who was one of the most prominent artists in Rome. Caravaggio was employed to paint the flowers and fruits, so there's still life within the larger composition. Now, to paint still life was deemed the lowest form of painting in and around the 1600s. But Caravaggio stated that painting still life required as much artistry as painting the figure. Now, at this time, this is quite a novel approach. Nature is my only teacher, he once remarked. We see this great attention to detail evident, particularly in his early works.
Yeah, if you look at A Boy Bitten by a Lizard, which is one of my favourite Caravaggios, then you will see the boy takes centre stage. You've got the lizard hanging from the boy's fingers, but you have the vase, the flower in the vase, and you have the fruits on the table. And they're not just blobs of colour. They're done with care and attention. You know, you can clearly see exactly what they are. So I think it
Yeah,
stood him in good stead, to be quite honest.
definitely, definitely. He's going to leave the workshop, and this is probably down to jealousy. So we have Cesare, who's envious of his assistant's talent, and you have Caravaggio, who's resentful of the commissions that Cesare's managed to acquire. Now, as a side note, there are a couple of paintings. You've got The Boy with a Basket of Fruit, and you've got A Sick Bacchus, very famous because it's a self-portrait of Caravaggio. Now, these were once within the collection of Giuseppe Cesare. However, these are appropriated by the nephew of Pope Paul V, Scipione Borghese, and this is why we find them in the Villa Borghese today.
Mm.
But Caravaggio, after this period, is then going to move from workshop to workshop, and there's intense rivalry and competition as a young artist to acquire work.
I mean, he did have a bit of a temper, didn't he? It's pretty safe to say.
It did. And this is a common theme with Caravaggio, how this rivalry will manifest itself into aggression. And in fact, much of what we know of Caravaggio are within the pages of the criminal archives. There's a list of misdemeanors by Caravaggio, and it seems there was a revolving door at the prison. So we have things such as attacking a waiter with regards to a plate of artichokes, throwing stones at police officers, bad language, offensive language, bearing arms without a license for his weapons. You also have a libel trial. Okay, this is rivalry. Caravaggio was disdainful of another artist's work called Baglioni. And so Caravaggio circulated mocking satirical verses about him. Now, Baglioni is going to take Caravaggio to court. Baglioni will win, and Caravaggio spends several weeks in prison. Now, Baglioni is going to write an autobiography later, in which he describes Caravaggio as the devil in human form. And in fact, many art historians believe that Baglioni, in his painting, Divine Love Conquering Earthly Love, painted Caravaggio as the devil. We've also got assault and grievous bodily harm. So he's going to attack a notary. And this was because Caravaggio, we know, used lots of live models for his paintings, and in particular used prostitutes. And so we've got a courtesan, and she's called Maddalena Antonietta, and she was nicknamed Lena. Well, anyway, Pasqualoni is going to make disparaging remarks about her, and so Caravaggio attacks him. Caravaggio then flees from Rome, goes to Genoa, and only returns under the protection of our Cardinal Scipione Borghese, the Pope's nephew. Now, despite his temper, however, Caravaggio is not friendless. So he does have acquaintances, friends, including Orazio Gentileschi, who's the father of Artemisia Gentileschi,
Well, that's
great
interesting.
painter, Prospero Orsi, Onoriolunghi, which is hard to say when you put your teeth back in. But they apparently lived by a motto, without hope, without fear. There's also a Sicilian artist, Mario Minetti, and he will be depicted as the Bacchus that we find in the Uffizi today. Also, Minetti is going to be prominent in Caravaggio's life again towards the end when he's fleeing. Another friend of Caravaggio was a man called Constantino Sparta, and he sells Caravaggio's work on commission because he had a shop. And it was through him that Caravaggio was introduced to influential patrons, including Cardinal del Monte. Now, the two works that had aroused the interest of this cardinal were the Gypsy Fortune Teller and the Card Sharks. Now, this is a huge turning point for Caravaggio. By age 24, he's been invited to live within the house of a cardinal. So he's being protected, he's being clothed. He's introduced to even more influential and powerful collectors in Rome. And there were thankfully, there were people who actually saw beyond the temperamental, vicious thug. So they realized that despite all of that, here we have somebody, with raw talent. That reputation, fame was everything. And it's nice to know that his art was actually appreciated in his lifetime.
Yeah, because many artists don't have that. But he had managed to achieve quite a lot by the age of 24. He's got a rap sheet longer than his arm, but he has managed to find favour with certain people and for his art to be appreciated. But so, who is this Who is this Cardinal Del Monte who's given him refuge?
Well, Cardinal del Monte is actually linked to Florence and the Medici family. Now, Del Monte, he worked for several years as the secretary and assistant to Cardinal Ferdinando de' Medici. So one of the sons of Cosimo, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Now, when Ferdinando's elder brother dies, Ferdinando renounces his vows and becomes the Grand Duke of Tuscany. So he takes his elder brother's position. Now, Del Monte in Rome will fill this empty position, and he's appointed cardinal. And in fact, the Bacchus and the Medusa paintings within the Uffizi we find in Florence today were actually commissioned to Caravaggio by Cardinal Del Monte as gifts to the Medici family.
Okay.
So in 1599, he will receive his first religious commission, and this is to paint the pictures in the Contarelli Chapel in San Luigi dei Francesi, which, strangely enough, was very near to the palace in which Caravaggio was staying with Cardinal del Monte. And he will paint the calling of St. Matthew and the martyrdom of St. Matthew, and these created a huge sensation. You have a sacred story painted as vivid, living drama. And his fame and reputation spread not just in Rome, but also his circle of patrons and collectors widen as well. He will leave the household of Del Monte when he accepts the hospitality of another cardinal. This time we have Girolamo Matteo, and it's here that he's going to paint the supper at Emmaus during this period.
Okay, so the Supper of Emmaus, you're talking about the version that's in in London in the National Gallery, aren't you? Because there are a couple of versions. You seem to paint a couple of versions of a lot of his works, actually. So in that version, we've got Jesus and three men. Two of them are his disciples, Luke and Cleopas, and the other one is a groom or a manservant of some description. But there's a lot of gesticulation going on, there's... And the men aren't refined. They're quite earthy. Yeah, so...
Yeah. Well, this is Caravaggio's style because he composes by staging scenes and he uses live models. So he's using characters from the streets of Rome. So you've got your prostitutes, your vagabonds, your gypsies, your card sharks, your hustlers. He painted stark, vivid reality, often graphic and violent, capturing life in Rome. They were almost, you could say, an historical piece. He paints on canvas, so very dark background, and he set lights to focus attention wholly on the scene, so no distraction.
So this is the chiaroscuro, which we also see, as we mentioned earlier, with the tintoretto, with the light coming down so that it focuses on the two, directly on the action as opposed to the stuff around you.
One of his other misdemeanors, in fact, is that his landlady is not going to allow him back in. He was behind on his rent, and she also saw that he'd made a hole in the ceiling. So he's most probably his just no thanks, you just made a hole in my roof. But this is how he gets his light and dark and, composing these scenes. Amazing, really, isn't it? But these
It is.
religious scenes, they're expressed through this theatrical use of light. It's almost this symbol of divine grace and salvation. He works quickly as well, and he was unique among the artists of the time, particularly in Rome, that there are no preparatory drawings.
No. And then it all goes wrong, eh? Murder charge, just to add to the long list. But was it over a tennis match, as legend would have it?
You're right, we've got the murder. We have the murder of Ranuccio Tommasoni. He was a pimp. Now, bearing in mind that Caravaggio uses prostitutes for his live models. For example, we had Lena before. He also used a prostitute called Philide, and he used her for 3 paintings. So something happened between the pimp and the client and the prostitute in between. On the 28th of May, 1606, we have a duel between Caravaggio and Tommasoni that ends with the mortal wounding of Tommasoni. Now, Caravaggio, I don't believe, aimed to murder Tommasoni. I mean, that's a bit too far. What he wanted to do was castrate Tommasoni. Now, that would have been brilliant, wouldn't it? Here, this pimp, castrated. But unfortunately for both Tommasoni and Caravaggio, he misses and he nicks an artery. And that's how Tommasoni dies. He bleeds to death. So they're in a lot of trouble. And not just Caravaggio, but also the people that were the spectators. Now, to duel in Rome was actually considered punishable by death. So the scene of a tennis match on which maybe money's been wagered was
safer for all
most probably the
concerned.
better. Exactly.
Yeah.
The better story. Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of, unfortunately, doesn't say much of Tommasoni if he missed it. Wasn't able to just cut it off and throw it in the gutter. But anyway, but was there a reason? I mean, yeah, maybe he's a bit annoyed with something between pimp and prostitute, but it still seems a little extreme to even castrate someone. So was there a reason for this volatile, violent behaviour, or was he just born bad?
I suppose we've got to remember that he's a young boy when he loses his father, his grandfather. I mean, he's got no paternal guidance whatsoever. He's the orphan at age 13. But we also have an art historian. He's called Andrew Graham Dixon. He's written a brilliant book on Caravaggio. And he writes that maybe actually one of the reasons was actually the paints that they were using. And he wrote that some ascribed the fiery temperament of painters to the toxic qualities of the materials that they used, such as lead white, vermilion. These were actually particularly poisonous. So the mere touch or smell of either might cause a variety of symptoms, including depression, anxiety, increased aggressiveness. Now, those with painter's colic, as it was called, also tended to drink heavily. Now, we know he did. So while wine alleviated some of the symptoms, he actually made worse others and was a catalyst for lots of brawls and scrapes. So whatever the answer is, Caravaggio is on the run for the last 4 years of his life and is under capital sentence for murder. So where does he go? Well, he goes to Naples. And it's here that actually he's famous. He's famous as this killer genius from Rome. So he actually receives numerous commissions. I mean, you've got the 7 Acts of Mercy that he paints there, only in 7 weeks as well. Flagellation of Christ, Crucifixion of St. Andrew, the Madonna of the Rosary, Judith and Holofernes.
I mean, yeah, that's a lot in a year. But also, what's the thinking behind all these religious institutions where they take murderer on the run as their artist of choice. It's a bit bizarre, isn't it? But anyway, I mean, whatever. He's only there for a year and then over the water to Malta. What took him there?
To all intents and purposes, it seems the pardon was being discussed.
Oh.
Now, with Caravaggio, we know that he is quite arrogant. We know that there's not a lot of humility. So does he feel that he needs an honour before he heads back to Rome, so as not to return as a man in disgrace? So is this why he goes to Malta? And the works that he does there, he does a portrait of Fra Antonio Martelli, who is a distinguished knight of Malta. Now we find this painting within the Pitti Palace in Florence. You have the portrait of the Grand Master, for which Caravaggio receives the Order of St. John, a knighthood. He's basically painting his way out of trouble, as he always does. You have the beheading of St. John during this period, and Caravaggio actually writes his name into the blood spilling from John's head. Now, he'd never signed a painting before, and he never did so again. And this painting was in exchange for this honour. And so you have this investiture that takes place where Caravaggio is inducted into the Sacred Knights of St. John. It's Malta, where he's made a Knight of the Order of St. John. So he has this honour before he then heads back to Rome, or what he wants to do.
Well, I mean, that's some rise, isn't it? You rock up as a murderer on the run, and the next thing you know, you're a knight of the Order of St. John. That's pretty good. That's pretty good penance, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah. But
He's only there
with
for a year,
Caravaggio,
so I'm gonna guess that he does something bad again.
exactly. A fall from grace, let's put it that way.
Mm.
He's his own worst enemy, can't help himself. He'll get into another brawl. He'll assault, and this time he seriously injures a knight of justice. And this was Fra Giovanni Rodomonte Roero. Okay. Caravaggio is arrested, is imprisoned. He actually manages to escape. So where does he escape to? To Sicily. So in October, we find him in Sicily, and we find him first in Syracuse, so a port town. Then he's in Messina, and finally we find him in Palermo. And as per usual, painting to absolve his sins, let's put it that way. And it's
Wow.
here that he comes into contact to one of his previous friends, the Sicilian artist, Mario Minetti, who was once a fellow apprentice. And by this stage, Minetti's established a thriving studio, and we think that Caravaggio will use Minetti's large workshop to paint. So it does, the burial of St. Lucy, the resurrection of Lazarus, the adoration of the shepherds. Okay. He's not in Sicily for long before he then returns to Naples, and again, more works, more commissions arrive. However, coming out of a tavern one evening, he's attacked by 4 men and cut on his face.
Crikey. I mean, he just attracts trouble, doesn't he, this chap? Any particular reason? I'm guessing there is. That he was attacked?
It seems it was a premeditated attack that had been ordered by Roero, the knight from Malta. Caravaggio is actually seriously injured. He wants to return to Rome. Okay. Now, whether a pardon had been arranged or was waiting to be arranged, Caravaggio wants to leave Naples, okay, and he wants to head back home. He leaves for Rome, so he's going to take a boat, and he takes 3 paintings. Now, the boat is going to dock about 20 miles west of Rome. And again, no one's really sure what happens here. Is it mistaken identity, or did Caravaggio say something that he shouldn't have done? Whatever happened, he's arrested, he's imprisoned. Whilst he's languishing in jail, the boat departs, continues to Porto Ercole. Ultimately, it's going to return to Naples, and it's going to take Caravaggio's belongings. He doesn't know this yet. So when Caravaggio's released, he sets out in pursuit of the boat, and he'll arrive first in Porto Ercole. Porto Ercole.
Mhm.
But already he's sick because he was seriously injured. He's sick and he'll succumb to a fever and he dies there. So he dies in 1610 at the age of 39. So very young. Age
Yeah.
of 39, had a career of only 18 years.
And yet he created all that incredible artwork in that time.
Yep.
Wow. I mean, he's just one of those troubled souls who dies young. Yeah, but what a talent. You quoted from Andrew Graham Dixon's book, Caravaggio, A Life Sacred and Profane, which we both think is a brilliant piece of work. And it's one we would both recommend to anyone who's interested in learning more about Caravaggio, because Mr. Graham Dixon doesn't publish many books because he takes a lot of time doing his research, etc. And so they are very, very good. But, we
Yeah,
would like you. If you happen to be
they've
listening, Mr. GD, another one would be nice. Maybe Gentileschi.
yeah. I mean, it takes he says it takes years and years and years of research, and it's so detailed that when you
Yeah.
read it, it's not just about Caravaggio, it's about the other people, it's about the paintings in particular, who's actually in the
Mm.
paintings, who tell the story of who actually is, the main character within that painting. So it's really the Bible of Caravaggio, and then you can add your extra learning in with maybe podcasts or, other articles, etc. But I'd say
Yeah.
that is the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the best one we've come across anyway. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
definitely. Yeah, if
That
anyone
was
else has got any other suggestions, then let us know.
Yeah, we're always interested in reading books. Okay, so if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with friends and family. If you agree, disagree, have any questions, put them in the comments below. And we'd also love to hear any suggestions you might have for season 2. You'll find more cultural stories in context on Italy News Online and also in floweasy.online, which is Sarah's website for any tours that you would like if you happen to be in Florence. So next time on Italy Beyond the Guidebook, we'll be exploring 800 years of St. Francis of Assisi. Ciao for now.